Hey guys, and welcome to the Hobby News. All right, so we've got Age of Sigmar goodies here. So this is a big day, I guess, and it's the 81st video for these news videos, which is kind of nice, an auspicious number. And it's pretty fun to see what they're showing here. So there's quite a lot to go through. I've picked sort of the things that I think will be the most fun to look at. It's most of it, I guess, for Age of Sigmar, but, still. And we're going to start with this Mortal Realms sort of, I guess, their massive project, they're calling it, for Cities of Sigmar. So, introducing mortals as a more substantial part of the Cities of Sigmar, I guess, faction, or the Order faction, so you can see more of what it's like to be human in this kind of environment, because they'll talk about it in the article. We'll go through it, but basically, and they do highlight this, is that you're meant to be sort of experiencing this world, or the narrative, through the eyes of humans, right? Because that's how you connect. I mean, all stories do that. That's why it's hard to write from the point of view of like an alien race or something like that, because you've got to add little elements of humanity there, so that when you're reading it, you can relate to that character or that situation and so on, and empathize. Otherwise, it becomes very dry and very cold and very difficult to sort of, remain focused on it, because there's nothing that you really care about it. It's the same when you see stories where all the characters are really despicable, or but again, you're still connecting with that because you recognize those traits. But it's very hard to have any kind of, care for a character like that, because if they're so cold and callous or so on, then there's nothing about them that's endearing that would even as a redemption story, to sort of stay with that. And so they do touch on that Age of Sigmar really doesn't have a strong fresh take, or their newer version of what their fantasy world is now compared to the old world of the human population and how they fit into all of these battles and so on. They really need to put a substantial mark on that. And you can see them here in this article kind of giving us a taste of the fact that they realize how important that is, and that this is such a massive undertaking, and they're trying to re-envisage, I guess, the Sigmarite followers and what they look like in this world, compared to, let's say, Warhammer Old World, which was very established, and they had a very, sort of Germanic kind of, at least for the I guess you call it the Cities of Sigmar in the Old World. It had that sort of very Germanic sort of, medieval type of structure. I mean, essentially, the old world was a map of Europe. The Bretonnians had that sort of French vibe going, and you can see it in the way that the map was laid out. And so Albion was sort of like England, that sort of northern sort of island, and that sort of thing. And they're all kind of positioned in the same places. And you had Cathay and so on off to the east, and all of that. So you can see it in Warhammer Total War. They've now, fully produced maps that have all the detail now. You can see all the way across to Cathay and all of that, which wasn't there in the early days of Warhammer. You didn't have as much of that. It was only hinted, but now you can see it all through Total War. So you should go and have a look at that, because I think they've done articles on the Warhammer community page that show all of that. But it's really interesting to see that. And so now we're in Age of Sigmar, which is a different kind of conception of this fantasy world, where you've got realms and so on, and all of those cities that hold these mortals. We have that book, but it doesn't really go into a lot of depth and detail into like how they like the sorts of people that are really, really doing this. It's all basically old models that have been taken from Warhammer Old World and then, repurposed here in this game. So this is going to be a fresh new, I guess, army faction and so on, that you'll be able to then start painting and collecting. So it's kind of interesting, and it is nice to see that they give it a bit of gravity, because they do need a human faction that's not the Stormcast. Stormcast are sort of like not really from the human point of view. They're reanimated souls. They're an undead faction, really, and or at least close to something like a Space Marine in the 40k universe, where they're sort of more than human. They're not really on the same level as a human being. So yeah, all good. I won't go on about that too much, but let's just see what they say. So revealed, the massive project to put mortals back into mortal realms. Yep. So the mortal realms encompass worlds of high magic and impossible vistas of epic adventure. So far, the Age of Sigmar has seen campaign, mighty Stormforged warriors stand against monstrous hordes, elves on flying sea beasts, clash with legions of skeleton constructs, gargants the size of castles, wrestle with living gods, and plenty more besides. But there's one thing that's been kind of missing: the ordinary folk who populate the cities of Sigmar. Yes. So normal humans offer a vital window into the worlds of Warhammer. When demigods clash with demon princes, it's the perspective of those mere mortals that gives us a frame of reference and helps us to imagine the scale. In Warhammer 40,000, we can compare the galaxy's myriad horrors to a humble guardsman, which helps us realize how lucky we are not to have to go anywhere near an Avatar of Cain or a Hive Tyrant. The same is true of the mortal realms, and while miniatures like the Vendents and Elmd Braskov, I think, from Warhammer Quest Cursed City have shown us how cool humans can be, they've always been a rarity among our releases. It's time for that to change, as we reimagine the forces of common humanity and the cities of Sigmar. So we've got like a nice little emblem here. And they're going to show us a little tidbit of what's to come. So organizing the fractious free cities is no easy task. So the full release is still quite a way off. But we don't intend to sit around and wait. Over the coming months, you can follow those who take up the coin Malleus, a sacred symbolic payment given to members of a Dawnbringer crusade, and join us on a Warhammer community as we journey through the Warhammer Studios development of this draw-dropping project. We've even managed to procure sneak peeks. So they go into their usual spool. So, if they're showing us this now, likely it's probably sometime next year or something like that, right? I would imagine it's going to be towards the end of this edition of the game. As they say, it's a huge project to reimagine something that's so locked in people's minds, at least for, existing gamers that have been around long enough to know Warhammer Fantasy and so on. There's a very, very strong look there that's based in kind of inspirations from our historical kind of real world. They took a lot of inspiration from that, and to add that high fantasy element into it is going to require quite a lot of design deliberation. You've really got to push that. You don't want to just throw in any old random, shapes and design language. You've really got to come up with something that's quite grounded in a solid idea that can be carried forward. Design's really interesting. If you ever want to see the process, probably the best that you'll ever see of how designers really do things would be to watch the Lord of the Rings extended editions, all of the sections on that on how they made it, on the making of videos that they have in those extras on those movies, and they go into a lot of detail and give you a sense of how Weta Workshop went about trying to imagine Tolkien's world, and the sort of lengths that they went to sort of figure out the design language for how it could be shown visually in a medium like film. Well, here you've got the same problem. They've got to try to reimagine something that's so fixed in people's minds as to what it all is, and then try to give a fresh take, because as they hinted at up there, the Age of Sigmar world is a lot more high fantasy than what Warhammer Old World was. Warhammer Old World was kind of dancing between high fantasy and low fantasy. It wasn't as in-your-face, epic kind of sort of characters. You had them in Warhammer Fantasy, but it was all about the sort of the infantry and the rank and flank and doing that kind of wargaming, which was very much, linked to older styles of war games, Napoleonic stuff, reenactment historicals and all of that sort of thing, whereas this is moving into a much more high fantasy situation. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with it. If those little witch hunters and so on are anything to go by from the Cursed City release, then yes, I think we're in for a pretty fun bunch of models. And just from a painting point of view, humans are really great because you can invest so much into them and do a lot with that. And I think that that's really needed for this game, because it's still, to me, when I was first coming back into the hobby and I was seeing it, it didn't really grab me. I saw all the beautiful models, the Nurgle models and all of that, and I loved it all. But I didn't see that. Exactly what they're saying is I didn't capture that, you've got the guardsmen in 40k, and that's how the jokes about the flashlights, their las guns and so on. You don't have that kind of joke, that kind of empathy towards any of the humans in this game. Like, you just don't have it. We have jokes about Stormcast because we treat them like Space Marines, and we have jokes about that, which is great. It's part of what the hobby is. We all have a good laugh about that, right? But you don't have that kind of thing for just the average human in this game, and they need that. They need to build up that kind of, I guess, humor and lore around the average human living in this world, so that we relate to it more. So it's not just a sort of weird, sort of amorphic kind of thing of these sort of spheres in space where everyone is. It was very hard when I first came into this. It was very hard for me to really picture what this world of Age of Sigmar really was. It was very hard. It didn't feel grounded. When you got into Warhammer Fantasy, you knew instantly what it was, because the map pretty much looks like Europe. So you go, oh, okay, I get the idea of what this world is. You sort of instantly understand really where they are. And even their imagery and so on is sort of drawn from those different cultures, those different countries from that area of Europe, and Asia and so on. So, you really understood it. But here, you don't. It's completely up in the clouds. So you really have to, because it's so high fantasy. So you need to ground it in something. So yeah, I won't go on about that, but that's really great to see. I'm really happy. You can tell that I'm an Empire player from way back, and it'll be nice to see, a more established version of these cities of Sigmar, and rather than just a carryover from an old game that they're no longer supporting, but well, they will be, I guess, in a couple of years. But it'll be nice to see what they do with this. So yeah, I'm pretty happy for that. So now, before I, take up all of your time and all of that, let's get on to something really fun. So Skaven are definitely coming, and as we saw with the roadmap that they showed for this Warhammer Fest, we've got a couple of books coming. So it's probably going to be Skaven and Sylvaneth, as we're seeing here. That's the things that they're showing us, the new miniatures. So they're probably the next two books, most likely. And then we've got a whole bunch of other books that are potentially going to be coming, including, obviously, Chaos, Slaves to Darkness at Christmas time. So that's really cool. But this is great. So this is following on from the discussion I had with you guys with the Warhammer Underworlds Warband. So we're seeing here a great new sort of, I guess, idea and design of these Skaven by giving them more anatomy. I mean, they always had it, but in the old models, it was very, very, compressed. And here we're seeing, really great, nice, long, legs and so on with full articulation of their joints, everything there, so they can actually move. So, when you want to show off something like an assassin, a Skaven assassin, you've got to be able to give them that animation and that attitude. And here we're seeing that potential movement. He's crouched, he's on top of this bit of, tactical rock here. He's ready. He's got his venom encrusted weapons. Everything's looking really intimidating and vicious, and you can see that he could actually move. You're looking at those limbs and the way they're perched on there. Everything is exactly as it should be for a character like this. And so, extending their I guess, their length in their body is going to give that for the sculptors to show more of what Skaven could be, rather than these little squat, I mean, they're cute. Those models are really cute. Don't get me wrong. I don't get any Skaven hate on the internet. Like, I love Skaven. But, this is definitely a great way to go. If they continue down this road, it's just going to open up more options for better design. And this is a great model. Like, even if you don't like, rats that much, you can't deny that this is a really nice sculpt. The designers did a good job here of capturing that feeling of an assassin. And for Skaven, this is their master assassin, isn't it? Yes. So they're Death Master. So it's not Snitch or whatever, but it's just like a generic Death Master. So you'll be able to, I guess, include one of those in the new book. And that'll probably open up Clan Eshin and so on. You'll be able to throw in the Warhammer Underworlds Warband as well to include as new models and that sort of thing. But I'm sure they're going to be releasing maybe a few more. Although we have seen that mostly with these new armies, for some of them, they're only releasing one model with the book. So yeah, hopefully there's more than just this model, but it could only be this and the Underworld Warband for Skaven. That'll be a bit of a shame if they don't release more, but it's possible. As we see with Sylvaneth, though, they've actually released a lot more models models for that. So yeah, maybe Skaven get a few more. I really like to see that because, you know, as I said, this new anatomy change for the way the Skaven are being depicted is a really good thing for them, and great for painting and modeling and converting and so on. So yeah, really nice model. Yeah, I don't know what else to say other than it's definitely a tick in my book for this type of character for sure. And then we've got the book there. So yeah, they're definitely coming soon, and most likely against Sylvaneth in some sort of, like, you know, promo box or whatever, which is fine. And that should be, I guess, out in the next month or two. And then we've got the Sylvaneth. So this is really cool. You know, as I've said previously, I'm going to be attempting to paint some elves this year. I know I keep saying it, but it is coming. I've got them prepared for some tutorials. I'm just working out the color schemes and so on that I want to try. But I am going to attempt pretty much one of each type, I guess, and just see what I think of it, because I've never painted elves, you know, over 30 years in this hobby, and I've never touched them. And, you know, just they never did it for me, but I want to expand my painting, you know, repertoire and that sort of thing, and try some different color schemes that you otherwise wouldn't do unless you did elves, because they do have a very particular kind of aesthetic that lends itself to certain kinds of colors and painting styles and techniques as well. So I want to just see what would happen if I do a few of them, and see where I go with it. Do I just end up doing the same thing and, you know, do my little color glazing and true metallics and all of that, or do I end up, you know, going down some other path and finding some new little funky tricks and things to make army building and so on, and painting fun, you know? So there's all of that there, but this is really great. I mean, as we're going to see further down, they're going down a more fey road for the Sylvaneth, which I think is really cool. So, you know, that sort of slightly fairy influence. We've already seen it with some of their new models, I think, but, you know, they're definitely incorporating that, and sort of like insectoid sort of elements and so on. I think all of that is really cool, because that's a whole, you know, world of lore and genre and so on that really has never really been touched by Warhammer before in any real serious way. So it's really good to see that. For my own brand, Blight of Gods, that's one of the factions that I'll end up doing. I'm still working those out, but there's no imagery on the site for any sort of fey creatures yet. But fey is definitely something I'm interested in, because if you look at all of the fairy tales and myth stories from our culture, it's really dark, and you know, it's very grimdark. You know, it's a very grimdark, you know, especially, you know, Eastern European stories of, you know, fey creatures and so on. It's really dark if you actually read these little stories. You know, they're told to kids and so on, but it's, you know, and they're really interesting. There's a lot of variety of different sorts of descriptions of fairies and so on, and what they do and how they are. And it's great. It's a great starting point to imagine what a sculpt or a mini or so on would look like, you know, with that as the basis of it. So yeah, really cool. So this is the Lady of Vines, and I'm assuming some sort of you know, hero character, and yeah, it looks great. So, you know, that's cool. I don't know what sort of rules this will have. You can see that it's that's a poor little plague bearer there getting squashed. It's kind of sad, but, you know, whatever. Yeah, really cool idea. So they're getting more into that. This is almost like organic mecha, right? So all of these sort of, you know, treemen and so on with all of this, it's very much sort of a, you know, if you can imagine Robotech, but or some sort of anime mecha, but as wood, you know, as an organic kind of material. It's a fun thing to play around with. I've done that too. Thought about different types of, you know, more organic sort of, I guess, rigs that you could do for a fantasy setting, you know, to give that kind of feel of robots and so on, like those large kind of mechas, and as you see in 40k with like Grey Knights with their big walkers and so on, with the little guy sitting inside. You know, Sylvaneth have that kind of idea, but just in an organic way for some of their models. And you know, here we're seeing a continuation of that type of idea of this sort of you know, animated timber, I guess. So that's cool. And then we've got these fairies. So this is really cool. This is where we're seeing that fey influence come out a lot stronger. And I think this is a great model. You know, back 20, 30 years ago, you would never heard me say that about an elf. But, you know, these days I'm grown a bit old and soft, so I'm happy to you know, say that these are fun. So, you know, and because of all these flat areas here and so on in the wings, and you can see they've really had a lot of fun getting some fades of color in there, which is really great as a painter. When you get into painting, these types of areas are really fun to do once you get over that hurdle of blending and shading and highlighting, and sort of understand understand how that works and how to control the paint, you start to see that this type of thing is actually a lot of fun. You know, it's no longer daunting or intimidating. It's now an opportunity for you to play. And that's the fun bit of getting to painting, to where it becomes play for these types of things, rather than, oh God, I've got to do flesh again, or oh God, I've got to do that big flat cape, or whatever it is, right? That becomes an opportunity to have a really good time with it and try something, you know? And that's part of what makes, I think, once you get into the painting, Games Workshop models are really good at balancing, you know, the detail and that sort of really crunchy depth of detail for things like washes and, you know, all of that sort of thing, and these nice smooth flat areas with no detail, so that you can actually, you know, paint with the brush and give yourself a chance to, you know, inform how that paint looks on the surface, because that's all telling a story and adds to the model itself. So it's a very important thing. And often when sculptors are sculpting that are outside of GW for, let's say, 3D printing, myself included, because the program you're using, which is generally ZBrush, you know, which is a 3D sculpting program, it has so many abilities for you to add texture. And so you often find that most 3D prints, you know, are generally heavily textured, and that's great because, you know, you can use things like contrast paints and that sort of thing on them, and they're awesome. But you know, when you want to really do your own kind of painting and your own blending and so on, having too much rough surface is kind of tricky, because then you can't imply anything. Like, have a look at this bow, and we're seeing the heavy metal painter has had a chance to sort of allow the painterly, you know, elements of the brush to imply texture, you know, and, you know, that's not sloppy painting, that's intended. You know, they're trying to get the feeling of, you know, just like when you look at a more expressionistic painting and you see the brush marks, that's kind of what's going on here. And if you look at a lot of high-end display painters, they don't always hide their brush marks. Sometimes they expose them, they let them be visible, so that you get a sense of the artist behind the paint, you know, and that's you expressing yourself. So even though you might not think of yourself as an artist or anything like that, that's one of the things that's an element of painting that you can explore, you know, and add to the overall. It's one of those elements that adds to a paint scheme that makes you either like it or hate it. You know, it's very, very under the surface, but it's there. So yeah, all in all, very, very cool. We've got some really great models here. They're going to be fun to paint. It's definitely enticing me because I really like the Fey idea. I think that's fun. I think that's something that's definitely worth exploring. So that's really cool. And then we've got these bug riders. So what are they called? Revenant something, Spite Rider Lancers, and we've got Revenant Seekers. So yeah, again, bringing in some of those bugs and all of that, you know, that you would have in the forests, and these strange sort of mutated creatures. That's all good. That's all good in my books. You know, just like with the Ideneth, you know, having all of those crazy sea creatures, the Sylvaneth should have the same kind of bizarre, you know, group of menagerie of creatures as they do. It should be as interesting to look at as that is. One of my first impressions of seeing AOS was you know, a couple of guys playing a game in the store, in a Games Workshop store, and one of them had Ideneth, and they had the, you know, the big sort of avatar thing on the wave, and one of the big turtles, and I was like, what the hell is that? You know, and that just drew me in straight away, as I'm sure it does anyone that sees that big turtle and so on. You go, wow, what is this? It doesn't look like a traditional war game, right? You see a big turtle flying through the air. So it's one of those things that's really eye-catching, and I think that they definitely should explore that for Sylvaneth, to give them a fresh face, you know, to draw people into this faction. So yeah, all in all, really, really fun. So I think I've waffled on too long on that. So let's move over and take a look at these Ogroids here. So Chaos, obviously everything's been leaked, and we all know that. And here are the what are they called? The Theoretins, and these are, I guess, their sort of double-handed weapon guys. You know, we've seen all the leaks, so their stats and everything, if you want to go check that out, you can find it online. It's not like really high-end stats for these, even though they look really sort of imposing, but it's you don't know what sort of buffs and overlaying kind of, you know, I guess sub-faction abilities and so on might occur for these to make that stat line better. So it's very hard to tell in Age of Sigmar how good something really is, because you need to see it in context with everything else. So, you know, in isolation, the stat line is, you know, okay, and then once you add all of the buffs, it becomes better. So yeah, still a really fun bunch of models. It's interesting they're exploring this side of Chaos and keeping it in the Chaos book, the Slaves to Darkness book, so you're getting that beast influence in the book, which is nice. But all in all, pretty fun models. Just from painting again, you've got some really great surfaces and details to play around with here to do some really fun models. I've seen plenty of that one. I think it was in, is it Warhammer Underworlds? There was one, that Ogroid, the really nice one that everyone paints. These will be fun to paint for sure. Like someone's going to do some really interesting colors on this, like for Zinch and that sort of thing, do some fun colors. So yeah, pretty nice. And I guess finally we'll end on what I think is maybe not the star of the show, but definitely something that I'm really happy to have a go at and paint, is this vampire they've got for Black Library. So they're releasing a couple of limited edition models, I guess, or special models, and we've got this great vampire. So this is awesome. I really like this. Again, we're getting, so what's his name? I don't know what his name is. Where is it? Kado Ezekiel or something like that. Anyway, he comes from the short stories, and this is fun. So again, we're seeing nice sort of flat areas of these sort of robes where you can do some nice blending. And if you haven't seen any of my tutorials, I'm a big fan of well, if you haven't seen, you don't know, but if you have seen them, I love blue greens, and so you'll be definitely seeing, if I get my hands on this, you'll definitely be seeing a blue green blend on that cave, and adding him to my collection, because that's a really fun vampire. It's just a nice attitude with the wind flowing like this and the cape and everything like that. There's a lot of nice spaces to do some nice blending, as they've done here in this image. And then you've got that exposed side. They've really done a good job of the vampires in this edition, I think, of capturing, just some fun attitudes and looks. They've got a variety of them now, and I think that they've really, done a lot of effort to try to give the vampires something interesting. The only thing they're really missing, I guess, which might come out in, I guess, their 3rd edition version of the book for Soulblight, would be just like a lesser vampire, armored vampire in a unit, that isn't mounted on a horse. So something on foot that's like a foot unit. I would really love them to release something like that, because as soon as they release a unit like that, that opens up all kinds of fun ideas. So I'm sure many people who like Undead and Soulblight have thought of this, but it'd be great to do a vampiric faction army based off of the Sylvaneth book, because think about it, you've got those wind spirits, you could have vampires, erupting into bats or into other creatures, or in swirling, ectoplasmic mists and so on. You could do all kinds of fun things with a vampiric sort of army based off that Sylvaneth book, because all of the units in the Sylvaneth book are perfect for that. You've got like, Teclis that could be like your big necromancer or a big vampire Mortarch. You've got all of these fun things, but what you need is a lesser vampire with armor and so on foot that you could use as the bowman unit in there, the sentinels or whatever, and all of those different units. You need like a one of these on foot with a couple of different options, so you can do a whole army of them. That'd be super fun. I think that would be that's the only thing that they're missing for me to have a go at that, because the Sylvaneth book has tons of great rules in it, but if you don't want to paint those elves, you're sort of missing out. But from a gaming point of view, it's very thematic towards undead and vampires. Like everything that they're doing in there is really interesting. All of those big cow giants and so on, you could do undead constructs, or even vampiric beasts. Get some really nice 3D prints and do some really fun sort of vampiric beasts or larger creatures that they've put together. There's all kinds of interesting concepts, but just from some of the basic units, they definitely would be really cool as vampires. So yeah, I'm hoping that they do that, but at the very least, this is a really great model. So yeah, lots of fun. And then finally, we've got this dwarf. So yeah, the KO is pretty cool. I haven't, the steampunk thing I'm not like totally into, but I know that many people are. So, but it's a really nice character. I mean, we've got lots of good surfaces here for you to play around with, as the painter has done here. If you're into steampunk, this is perfect for you. You've got everything that you would want, right? So, and it is a dwarf, and I love dwarves, so it's still very cool. But I think the star of the show, if we come back up to here, this vampire is definitely the one, right? So that's what I'll leave you on, because I think I've waffled on for too long now. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button. It really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.